Hey guys, it's Lisa with Are You My Cousin? And we have a special live Facebook on Facebook and YouTube today. As you can see, I have Jen Baldwin from FindMyPast with me again. Welcome, Jen. So excited to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's always so fun to be with you and your community. It's great.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Jen and I have so much fun when we do these lives together. And as you know, Jen is from FindMyPast, and we are going to be talking all about the Catholic records and Catholic Heritage Archive there at FindMyPast. So super, super excited about that. And in case anybody doesn't know, just to give you a heads up, Roots Tech starts this week, guys. So make sure if you haven't registered, you definitely want to get over and register for Roots Tech, because that will start on Thursday and run through Saturday. So super excited about that. And you can catch me on the Facebook Live. I'll be doing Facebook Lives every day or for those 3 days, just to kind of make sure we're having a good experience and make sure that, you know, as we see new things that we can share and learn from each other and how to get the most out of this virtual experience. I think it's just going to be an amazing time for that. And I know Jen will be there too, I'm sure.
I will be. We're doing the same thing. We've got the list of talks spread across the company, and everybody's kind of picking what they want to watch and feeding back to the rest of the group. So it's going to be good.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we've already got folks coming in today. We've got Ann from Knoxville, Tennessee. Oh, part of my heart is in Knoxville, guys. As you guys know, my daughter's there. And we have Ohio is in the house. Bill's here from New York, from Long Island. Phil from Detroit. Hey, Lily, down from Southern Mississippi. And Chris, yay. Hey, Chris, how are you? Is here as well. So we definitely have people from around the U.S., South Carolina, Pennsylvania. I don't know if we have any of our UK friends joining us today or not. So if you are, chime in. We'd love to know if you're there as well. But we have our Alberta, Canada is in the house as well. So yay, guys, we've got lots of folks with us today. So excited you could join us today on this. So as I said, if you have not met me before, if you are new to Are You My Cousin, I am Lisa Lisson. And so I do write over at Are You My Cousin blog posts, trying to help take that overwhelm out of your genealogy research. And part of doing that is to bring in Jen from FindMyPast so that we can learn how to use FindMyPast as well as some of their specific collections like those Catholic records, Jen. So, we have our UK folks are chiming in.
Oh, yeah, yay. They are.
Scotland, yay. The UK near. All right, I know this is saying it with a southern accent. Twickenham? I don't know if I said that right. Okay. More Canadians, New Hampshire, Portsmouth. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So excited you guys are here with us. So Jen, tell us a little bit about what we're going to talk about today with this traveling across the ocean.
So yeah, Catholic records are really exciting, and I hope everybody is excited about this as I am. I really geek out on religious history. So, you know, a few years ago, FindMyPast launched the Catholic Heritage Archive project, and we're working to digitize records from the Roman Catholic Church, which have long been hidden to genealogists for a number of different reasons. And we've been working with archdiocese and diocese both here in the United States and across the pond in England, Ireland, Wales, Scotland. And we've built a pretty massive collection that just actually continues to be added to. So we're really excited to talk about Catholic records and kind of breaking down some of these research barriers for a whole lot of us, myself included. My maternal line has a long tradition of Roman Catholicism. So it's just been an incredible project to work on, actually. Partly because of my heritage and the way I was raised, but also just because it's such an incredibly rich type of record, right? Catholics wrote down everything.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. I know. I'm a little jealous sometimes when I do my research.
I know. I really do wish that I had more research in some of these areas, for sure.
Definitely. All right. Well, let's get started on that. And I guess one quick thing before we dive in is that I am, just full disclosure, guys, I am an affiliate for FindMyPast. So just wanted you guys to know that. So I'll be putting some of the links as Jen talks about things into the comment section. Both it'll show up on YouTube and in the Facebook group. So just note those are affiliate links for me. Doesn't cost you anything extra at all, but it does help keep the lights on here at Are You My Cousin? So there you have it. All right, Jen, let's go for it.
Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and put, let's see, can I do this? No. Lisa, can you add that, my slides to the stream?
There you go.
And is it showing right?
Yes, I see it fine.
Okay, great. I'm just 2 monitors, so I never am confident that it's going to set up right. So let's talk about the Catholic Heritage Archive first and foremost, and what that really means. That's a kind of a standard name we use at FindMyPast for all of our Catholic records around the globe combined. And what we're going to talk about today are actually only available on FindMyPast. So if you have interest in Catholic research, you really need to be looking at FindMyPast. And so what does that include? The Archdiocese of New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Cincinnati, plus the Diocese of Chicago and Toledo, and then some indexed records from down in Missouri. Now, I will stop for just a second on this particular slide. All of those locations are published and available online. The one that we are still working on in terms of digitizing is New York. And we just released last month, actually, a big new update to the New York collection. But I will say that COVID has really slowed down this project. We've gone weeks and months at a time where we have not been able to access the facility to actually scan the records. And our transcription partners have been slowed down because of COVID. So this project is going to be going on for a while. It was originally established to be a 4-year project up in New York, but it's going to extend probably significantly longer than that because of the pandemic. But of course, our priority is to keep everybody safe. So that's what we're going to do, right? Safety before scanning. Safety before scanning. I just made up a new phrase for myself. So that's what we're working on in North America. But on the other side of the Atlantic is, of course, the key to kind of bridging that ocean gap, right? Being able to find your ancestors in a North American record is great. Being able to then find the correlating next event in a Sacramento register on the other side of the ocean is really essential. So as a part of this project, we have also done all of Ireland, the British Armed Forces, the City of Liverpool Records Office, which holds an incredible amount of Catholic material, Westminster Archdiocesan Archives, Bishops' Conference of Scotland, English non-conformist records, Catholic newspapers, and then the Scottish collection we'll talk about kind of at the end of the hour because it continues to grow and there's some really exciting developments there. So for the most part, what we're working on is Sacramento registers, right? So the records that incorporate birth and marriage, not necessarily death or burial from every location, although in some places they are included. And then there's a number of Catholic newspapers that are also part of this project. All right. So to understand Catholic records, you kind of, especially when you're trying to cross the Atlantic, you have to understand a bit of religious history. And I think that this is an important refresher, especially for those of us in North America, right? It's really easy for us to think about how our country runs, how the United States runs. And we have to really, like we've said all along, Lisa, we really have to think about putting ourselves into that UK mindset. And remember that England does actually have a national religion, right? Whereas the United States does not. And so there's a lot of history involved here. And Lisa and I talked before we started. I'm kind of going to skim through some of this, but Lisa, if there are questions, just interrupt me and we'll pause or move on. But we're going to actually start in medieval times, if you can believe that. And to really understand kind of the religious story of the UK, you really have to go back quite a bit, right? So there are 5 principal changes that marked kind of this transition from medieval to early modern times and into the religious changes across the UK. Or Great Britain. Some of these were obviously much more sudden than others, and some have some very deep roots. What we're really going to focus on, though, is the 5th component, which of course is the Reformation, right? If you don't know about the Reformation, it's well worth getting a reference or a book to really kind of dig into some of that history. Reformation in England really kind of kicked off in 1529 through 1537, which is when the Church of England officially separates from Rome. Reformers, so the congregations themselves, right, people involved in the Reformation movement, kind of alternated during that period between Catholic traditions and Reformed principles for decades, actually. So this was a long, slow burn, right? This was not an immediate, like, oh, we're now Church of England and everybody start using this new religion. It didn't happen like that. And then, of course, from 1535 to 1540, you have the dissolution of the monasteries, which is probably one of the most well-known periods of the Reformation phase across England, right? Is when they're literally tearing the monasteries down. Now, a lot of this all happens because of one of our favorite historical characters, Henry VIII. He was Catholic when he took the throne. He was actually critical of Lutheranism. He was called the defender of the faith, but his marriages got in the way, and of course he wanted heirs, and we all kind of know that story. But he wants to marry Anne Boleyn, and so he seeks annulment. That's denied. Eventually, one of his advisors, Cardinal Thomas Cranmer, tells Henry to divorce the church. He breaks away, marries Anne, and forms the Anglican Church for the first time. And in 1534, this is maybe one of the most important pieces, the Act of Supremacy actually is passed, and it recognizes Henry VIII as the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England. Now, that's a huge shift, right? Because up until this point, the Pope has been this person. And now all of a sudden you're saying that the King of England is equivalent to the Pope, and that's a big deal, right, for Catholics kind of around the world. So the effect of Henry's decisions is massive, right? He now controls 25% of all English land, which is an enormous amount of property, right? Including taxes, right? So it becomes a financial decision for sure. They go through that period where they start to close the monasteries. There's a multi-class rebellion referred to as the Pilgrimage of Grace, and it ends up forming. All of this happens, and we end up getting the Statute of 6 Articles, where Anglicans kind of maintain 7 Catholic sacraments, celibacy, and a few other elements. And that is the point where you start to see parish records from the Church of England really start to mirror that of the Catholic Church, right? The Catholics have always been really good at writing things down. And Church of England is very good at documenting as well. So, Church of Ireland, Church of Scotland. But the reason those two bodies are so similar is largely because of the Statute of 6 Articles. So all of this is happening in England. I know a lot of people out there really interested, of course, in the Roman Catholics from Ireland. So what's happening at this phase, during this time in Ireland? Mm-hmm. So the Act of Supremacy, again, goes into effect in 1534, has global ramifications. In 1541, the Irish Parliament officially changes the status of Ireland from a lordship to the Kingdom of Ireland as a direct result of the Act of Supremacy. Reformation in Ireland is largely driven by changes in government policy versus a movement of the people, whereas Reformation in England was very much a mass wave of reform. But that government policy, of course, in Ireland is not embraced by the people, right? They continue to maintain their Roman Catholic tradition. In 1537, Henry tries to make Ireland the source of funding that England has now become, right? He tries to force the closure of Irish monasteries. He faces opposition. He tries to get the same kind of property in Ireland as he now has in England, and he fails. He fails to really gain that financial success across Ireland as he does in England. By 1547, when Henry dies, around half of the Irish monasteries have been suppressed, but not because he was able to come in and just kind of force his way and force his decisions. He makes small deals with local and regional lords, and they take oaths of allegiance. So it's all very segmented in Ireland versus in England, where it was just kind of a massive wave of litigation. So after Henry, right, then we get this 5-year period under Mary, where we have a brief Catholic restoration. And of course, she doesn't last very long. Elizabeth I takes power after Mary. And we then see the Irish Act of Uniformity in 1560, which makes worship in the Church of Ireland compulsory, right, instead of allowing people the choice. The Elizabethan religious settlement largely forms Anglicanism into a distinctive church tradition. So we start to see more unique traditions coming out of the Anglican Church, and they're less modeled after Catholicism than they have been up to this point. And then, of course, the key to those of us in North America is that in the 16th to 17th centuries, the Puritan movement ends with eventual migration into North America. So all of this happens because of the 2 centuries in front, before them, and all of these movements into kind of making England the modern state that we know in modern history. So what happens to all of these English Catholics? Well, historians have generally always kind of said and believed that it was a swift Protestant transformation that swept across the country. And actually, modern interpretations show that that's not really that accurate anymore. After 1559, the Catholic community starts to emerge, and it's sustained by the wealthy, right? They can afford to have priests kind of living in-house with them and on retainer, if you will. Most of the lower class and poor are really reliant on roving priests, and so they're unable to practice their faith with consistency. And then they start to get this act of recusancy, right? That was really emphasized across the church. And that was just this willful kind of non-attendance at established church services. So people just adamantly saying, I'm not going to service at the Church of England on Sunday morning. I'm going to stay at home and have my Catholic priest, say mass for me on Sunday instead. And what we see is that this debate across the world of history and historians really kind of goes on and is actually still happening, right? There's still a lot of research to do. And they really debate the importance and the impact of that recusancy movement, but it has become much more significant than we kind of thought for quite a while. You get into this period where church attendance was actually seen as a political act, right? It changes from just staying faithful and just staying to your church and actually becomes a very intentional choice in terms of your politics. So most Catholics engaged in at least a minimal acquaintance with the established church, again, for kind of political reasons, but also social reasons, pragmatic, right? If you didn't go to church and you were known to do that intentionally, that was a choice. It could have been seen as an act of treason. Right? Technically, it was against the law. And so if you are researching someone that you believe to be Catholic and you see them kind of in the Church of England records in a very spotty, inconsistent manner, you might be able to build a hypothesis and a theory that they were in fact Catholic because they were only going to church to just kind of stay out of trouble, right? So it's an important piece of that English Catholic research process. And again, the gentry, the wealthy, found it much easier to move into this phase, and the poorer Catholics were just kind of often forced into complete conformity across the board. So we get this point where we say and this is a quote obviously from Carolyn Hibbard and her work, the great majority of English Catholics refused to make a choice and continued to live in an uneasy but sincere conflict of loyalties, right? So we have this group of people who really wanted to be loyal to their king, to their queen, to the country, but their faith drives them to be loyal to a different church and to a different leader of the church. And that's a huge conflict in the social fabric of England. For us as genealogists, it's actually really good news, right? It was a struggle for our ancestors, but because historians are in the midst of this research and this debate, there's still so much more work to be done, right? There's so much more for us to learn from. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of the economical concepts and economical impact of these decisions around faith that will result in more research coming out, more books written, and more opportunities for us as genealogists. So with our brief history lesson in our mind, where does that leave us? What is the impact to us as family historians? So we really kind of end up with two significant pieces, right? The first is that because there was all this conflict happening in that phase, there is a lot of detailed record keeping that's available to us, right? And some of these records obviously are not going to be online. They're at the National Archives or perhaps even in the Vatican, right? The locations of these records are widespread, but you look at something like the Privy Council, they were very hostile towards Catholics. They kept a lot of records on Catholics. And so there's a lot of potential research opportunity. The other significant impact for genealogists is that we may find our Catholic ancestors mixed in with Anglican parish records, or in parish chest records, or in non-conformist records. And that means that to truly get an authentic picture of our ancestors and their activities, we have to look at all types of religious records during the period. We cannot just say, I didn't find them in the Catholic register, so they're not there. We have to look everywhere.
That's a good point. And I think it goes back, Jen, to some of what we've said in past videos together, is that if something was important to your ancestors, it definitely has to be important to you as a researcher.
Absolutely.
And certainly faith was important to many of them. And with being so tied to the political situation. I can only imagine with our ancestors having, I mean, you just kind of that whole back and forth.
Yep.
How conflicted they must have been at some point.
Right. I mean, these are literally questions that our ancestors lost sleep over, right?
Yeah.
Is, do I go to church tomorrow morning or do I go to mass and in somebody's basement and risk being caught, being thrown in jail? What about my family? All of those things. And these were truly, in some cases, life and death decisions.
Right. And when you start to understand those kinds of issues that they were having to face, it does make sense that you would, of the types of records that we need to look at beyond, say, just that parish record.
Right, exactly. So if you're looking across England for your ancestor in any kind of religious record from roughly 1570, 1580, all the way through the 1830s, when the Roman Catholic Relief Act is passed, you need to be looking in every religious record you can find until you find them. And that's a big period of time, right? That's 1570 to 1830s. That's a couple of centuries worth of records. So it's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So then we get into, and we talk about, all these different types of records. Well, what are we really looking at? Well, there's the Church of England or the Church of Ireland, Church of Scotland, the Anglican Church. There's Roman Catholic, but there's also this other category of Dissenters and non-conformists. And for this period of time, and for our purposes as genealogists, we can kind of see that these two terms are essentially interchangeable, right? But they were Dissenters and nonconformists it was a legally defined population of people. It was a legally defined term. And so if you are a Protestant of any nature who refused to comply with the terms of the Act of Uniformity of 1662, you were essentially put into this category of nonconformists. So in many locations, Presbyterians and Congregationalists were, for all practical purposes, a single group of people, and records often do not reflect those specifics. They will not necessarily say this person was Presbyterian. They will just refer to them as a dissenter or a nonconformist. So it's another piece of the puzzle that you need to understand if you're looking for someone who's not part of the Anglican Church. So the Act of Uniformity is one we haven't talked about. And again, I'm just going to kind of brush through this. But essentially, it's passed in 1662, and it says everybody's required to use all rites and ceremonies from the Book of Common Prayer. Well, in 1662, they also published a new version of the Book of Common Prayer, and most people had never seen a copy. So you're passing a law that says you have to follow all these rites and ceremonies, but we don't know what those rites and ceremonies are, and we don't have access to a copy of that book. And so it was a tricky law to actually follow, right? But it explicitly required episcopal ordination for all ministers, deacons, priests, bishops, no matter what you called yourself. There were some really specific rules that you had to follow, and this all had to be reintroduced, largely because the Puritans had abolished many features of the church during the English Civil War, right? So the Puritans went in and said, we don't want all these old Catholic traditions. That's the whole point of being a different church, right? So we're going to rewrite some of this, and we're going to recreate some of this. And then the Act of Uniformity and the new Book of Common Prayer kind of said, here's the new way we're going to do these things. And that is where most of our traditions for the Anglican Church come from, for baptism, marriages, calling of the bands, all those kinds of things kind of happen as a result of the Act of Uniformity. We also get, then a few years later, the Act of Toleration, which grants the freedom to worship for nonconformists, but not Catholics. So Catholics are still very much kind of in the closet, if you will, whereas the rest of the nonconformists are allowed a little bit more freedom. Their nonconformists are now allowed to create their own place of worship. They can have teachers and preachers. They're still banned from social, political offices, for example. And they're still shunned largely, I think, in the community, but they're allowed to do a little bit more, but not Catholics, right? So we get then 20 academies for nonconformist ministers, a more liberal education platform for a good chunk of the population. The impact of all of this is that Catholics continue to be kept under official surveillance after this act was passed. And of course, that means records, right? So it also means that more of these dissenting groups start keeping membership records after 1688. So if you're looking for someone that you think might be a dissenter, nonconformist, you have access now to the creation of more paper, right? Because before the Act of Toleration, they would never have written anything down because that is evidence of treason, right?
Right.
So now we have kind of some surviving membership lists, largely from the urban areas. And it's easier to identify, especially, again, people of wealth in some of these other denominations. So when it comes to records access, some online records, and this is broadly speaking across a variety of websites, from archives to genealogy sources to libraries, they have divided the records between the Church of England and nonconformists. In fact, FindMyPast has a nonconformist collection where we've kind of separated those two bodies of people. But if the collection does not separate those two populations for you, you need to remember two things. Those who regularly attended meetings held by ministers who did not conform to the Act of Uniformity is a clue that you are looking at a dissenter or a nonconformist. And secondly, the Protestants who were prosecuted in any kind of court, whether that was ecclesiastical or civil, is a sign that they may have been a dissenter or a nonconformist. So if you cannot identify specifically what denomination of nonconformists you're looking at, you need to be looking at the ministers they followed and the court records to see if you can glean more information from either of those sources. So take your religious research out of religious records and look at some of these other collections. I hope that makes sense. I haven't said that for a while.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, definitely, because religion and politics were so tied too that it makes sense that when you're looking at this, you definitely need to get out into those other records as well.
Right. So again, dissenters are excluded from political power at the national level. Generally speaking, by the 18th century, the rich had largely disappeared from nonconformist congregations. They've kind of come into the Anglican fold, and the wealthiest merchants kind of left the movement by the middle of the 18th century. So if you're looking mid to late 18th century or later, you're probably looking at someone who is not of a wealthy class, whether they're gentry or a wealthy merchant. So it kind of helps you separate your ancestors' economical status as well by being able to define if they're a dissenter or not. Okay, so we know, right? We need to move beyond parish registers. In rural areas, especially, look for estates that were known Catholic. Presumably, there are more Catholic lower class around that because they would have been dependent on that estate, that person in the gentry to support their Catholicism, keeping the religion alive. And for both Catholic and dissenting populations, look at quarter session records specifically and tax records, as well as the minister, like we've already discussed. Okay, now what about Catholic records? So let's jump into some of the records that are a little bit more unique to the Catholic Church. And I'm going to start actually with Catholic censuses. These were actually taken pretty regularly, although today they're rather limited in availability and time period. Most have been transcribed by the Catholic Records Society, which is a UK-based organization. So if you're doing UK research and you're unfamiliar with Catholic Records Society, absolutely take a look at their website and get to know them and read through their material. It's a really, really important resource. Some of their publications, the images of them are available via Internet Archive or Haiti Trust. Know the terms and conditions for those records. But definitely take a look at them. They're really, really important materials. So here's one example. This is the Catholic Records Society. This is an image from one of their record series. And it lists, as you can see, all publications up until 2010. So this is available on their website, and they outline everything that they've done over the history of the society. It's a really incredible resource, actually, just to pour through this material and see what you might be able to look at, whether it's digitized or not, right? Some of these records are still going to be held, in archives, obviously. But if you look through the list, just on the screenshot, you can see, there's I just had a genealogical notebook, an autobiography from D. Gristle, right? That is clearly going to be of interest to someone. There's Catholic mission registers of St. Peter's and Winchester from 1721 to 1826, right? So these are all resources that any Catholic researcher really needs to know about, especially across the UK. So when we look at some of these, and they do have these census collections, we get examples like this one, right? So this is a description of the census of the Augsburg Catholics from 1790 to 1804. It's an account book. It takes up 12 folios, right? So it's a decent amount of information. And it gives you the history and kind of a summary of what information was recorded, information about the wife's Christian name, right, and how they reference people, and so on. And then the actual census starts to look like this. And so it is one of those where they're counting members of the household, but you do see men and women and children named, and then the household groupings with the little symbols on the far left-hand column. So really, really good information through the CSR. Another example, they have extracts of parish registers. So this is from that same collection in Augsburg. And these, look at the top line, these registers begin in 1538. Some are published and printed by the Norfolk Archaeological Society, but the vast majority is not, right? So, and these are transcripts, right? These are indexes of those records. And I haven't looked specifically on this collection, but from recollection, I believe that these parish registers no longer exist. They've been lost to history. So this may be the only source that we have for this particular parish in Augsburg.
Wow.
Yeah. Pretty good stuff, right?
Yeah.
Cool stuff. So far more than just census records, but definitely take a look at the CSR. It's well worth your time. Now, when we talk about FindMyPast, because of course we do want to talk about FindMyPast today, we're going to start with the England and Wales Roman Catholic records. And one of the first things you really need to understand is where and when your ancestors were located, of course. So there is this very early list of Roman Catholics in the county of York, for example, from 1604. There are a variety of examples of this kind of publication on FindMyPast. They're limited, but they are available and they are searchable. So you could take context like you find at the CSR and potentially recreate that search on FindMyPast and then search via OCR. You're looking at a sample from Yorkshire Baptist, right? Papist, I said that wrong. And you just look at the top line, right? Thomas Beckwith, gentleman, his wife Margaret, with his and they're recusing themselves, right? Non-communicant for 3 years, et cetera, et cetera. So you kind of get an idea of the history of your ancestor, like the immediate history, especially if they are, again, of that gentry class. I highlighted an example. I like this one. It's a secret baptism. It's a great entry, right? Thomas Min, Mary, his wife, they were in the parish half a year within which time they had a child secretly baptized, and they were recusants, right? This is great genealogical information, right? These are the stories of our ancestors right here. It's really cool. And then we move into, again, some of that Catholic Records Society kind of miscellaneous material. These are also in some cases available to find on FindMyPast in our PDFs. Again, sporadic year coverage, but because they're on FindMyPast, you can actually you can search by OCR. So we move then into the 18th and 19th century. We get the 1778 Papist Act. We get 1790, England allies with Catholic Spain, Portugal, and the Holy See during the French Revolution, right? So politics once again take precedence over religion. In 1800, we have the Acts of Union. Then you see the Church of England kind of trying to play a role as the bridge church since Reformation, right? They're trying to finally kind of end the discrimination. 1892, you finally get the Roman Catholic Relief Act. And as a result, records and record access becomes easier and more uniform. And that's our history lesson for the day. How did that?
I think it's great. The perspective that you get, Bill, over and on the YouTube comment said it really gives that additional perspective on why someone may have come to North America for religious freedom. I mean, there's just this constant back and forth. the stress of it must have just been tremendous.
It really must have been. And I'm actually, my interest in religious history is kind of long-standing, and I'm just now starting to dig into early Baltimore, for example, early Maryland as a colony, and really start to understand and see even more of what that was really like. Was it really religious freedom? Right? Those are the kinds of questions I'm now starting to ask myself.
Right. That's
That's
what we do.
That's what we do, right? That's what we do. One answer leads to 5 more questions, and that's what makes it fun.
Absolutely.
So then we move into, of course, the actual records that are on FindMyPast. So one of the easiest ways to access this material is actually just a simple URL, findmypast.com/page/Catholic records. You can access these materials through our regular search engine, but I like to refer people to this page because it does give a direct link to all of the major territories. So America, Ireland, England, and Scotland. And then it does also give some helpful tools, right? So we have some guides around learning to read and interpret Latin, for example, because most of the records are using some form of Latin. We give you some advice in terms of how to do additional research in your Catholic ancestors. But the easiest way to get to the records on FindMyPast is to go to the All Record Sets page on the site, and you simply type in the word Catholic up in the top box, and you get the list of everything around the world that's related to Catholicism, which is great because you can see the whole collection in one place. You can narrow it down by country or territory if you prefer, but it's really good to just get an understanding of what is available from kind of a global perspective, so you can really find that immigrant. You can also, of course, access this through our main search engine page. If you go to Browse Record Set, you click on that, you get a little pop-up box. And again, you type in the word Catholic, and then you can click all of the records that you're interested in. You can search baptism, marriages, congregational records, and newspapers, for example, all with one search. So that's just kind of a quick little look at kind of easy ways to access the material on FindMyPast. I like to do that, and especially many of you might see that I've checked the Philadelphia Roman Catholic newspapers in addition to the New York Sacramento registers. And the reason for that is because the Philadelphia papers often publish news from dioceses around the country. So if I'm looking for a particular family member, I think they might have been married in New York. That's great. I can probably find their marriage, but I might also find mention of them in the Philadelphia diocese newspapers. So don't overlook those kinds of overlapping connections, especially in kind of the Eastern Seaboard region. Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York newspapers all publish news from the Catholic community, both nationally and internationally. So it's a great resource.
Yeah, that sounds. So when you mentioned that Philadelphia would oftentimes publish information from, say, New York, things that were happening, is that unique to Philadelphia in this case, or would New York have been publishing things that might have happened in Philadelphia? I was just curious how that might have been.
Yeah, it definitely goes back and forth. It's not unique necessarily to Philadelphia. And you'll see especially things like, a fire destroyed a church. That's going to be reported in, pretty much every Catholic newspaper I've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
And even in UK Catholic newspapers. And I'll actually give you an example of that in a bit. But so those Catholic newspapers are really, really important, and I think they're often overlooked. People are so excited to finally get their hands on those Sacramento registers that they've been after for 20 years that they forget about the social context available that's in the newspapers. So don't overlook the newspapers, because they will post and publish national stories as well, right? There'll be non-Catholic news in those newspapers, but they're obviously going to publish anything they can find on news of the Catholic community.
Right.
So if we kind of take a little tour through the FindMyPast collection, and on both sides of the pond, of course, the England Roman Catholic Parish Collection has been online for a while. It includes baptisms, marriages, burials, and congregational records from 1657 through 1907, so 3 centuries or 2.5 centuries worth of history. The records are available to view up to 1907. The Bishops' Conference of England and Wales placed a 110-year closure period on all Sacramento registers. So anything 110 years ago and forward in time is not going to be available online because of that policy. So some of the parishes within the diocese have actually chosen to retain their sacramental registers and are not included in the collection. So keep in mind that each parish, each diocese inside the archdiocese has the ability to make their own decisions, and that's true for North America as well. So every agreement that we are able to sign with these partners, it differs a little bit on what is allowed and what's not allowed. So in this particular collection, it's the Diocese of Birmingham, Liverpool, Middlesbrough, Southwark, and Westminster. And the records are, about what you would expect, right? They look, as this example shows, they look pretty neat and orderly in many cases. This example is from the Birmingham Archdiocesan Archives, and you start to see that some of the ministers and priests included more information than others, so you get all the extra information over in the columns, right? The Catholic Archdiocese of Liverpool, from 1754 to 1988, just as in and of itself, just for the Archdiocese of Liverpool, is 2 million records. So somewhere around 100,000 images for you to look at. So it's a pretty incredible collection. And when we talk about kind of the format of the records, right? We can look, these two records are actually just 60 years apart, but there's an incredible difference between the two, right? Vastly different in terms of style and how they process things. So over the course of the 1800s, you really see all of the churches, right, with mass publication of registers, blank registers being sent out to all denominations. You really see that transition from kind of this free form script into these nice organized boxes and registers where a lot of the text is pre-printed. And that's where you find a lot of the consistent Latin, right? In some parishes, you really have to learn how the priest actually writes and the terms he uses. And you kind of have to understand the priest or the secretary in order to understand the register. But as you move forward in time, you get to this more standardized format.
Yeah, and Jen, let me just jump in here. Somebody had asked in the Facebook group or the Facebook page about because so many of the records were in Latin, where would they learn more about that? And so definitely on that Catholic Heritage page, if you scroll to the bottom, they have a section about kind of how to read and how to get through those Latin records. So yeah, just go to the link up. I just popped it into the YouTube and the Facebook pages just a minute ago, so you should be able to see that.
Yeah, and the other so I have two other suggestions for the Latin question, because it is a tricky one, right? And sometimes you'll find a register like this one that's got all the kind of the content written in the margins, and sometimes that is not common, right? So what that guide will tell you is kind of common genealogical terms that you'll find, but when you get into some of this script, it's difficult to interpret. So I have found Google Translate to be relatively accurate at least giving me an idea of what the record says. But also feel free to email an archivist in any kind of Catholic facility. I recently sent a transcription to the Archdiocese in Baltimore and said, I think I've got this about right. What do you think? And she said, yeah, you're about 75%. Here's the piece that you're missing, and this wasn't quite right. So I have found that once these records are made available online, the archivists and archives are quite happy to help you interpret and understand their records.
Definitely.
So don't be shy, right? Feel free to communicate with those organizations. Okay, so from across England, now this Birmingham collection actually extends past sacramental registers. In this case, we were also able to publish masses for the sick and dead, which I find just absolutely fascinating, right? In this case, there's actually anniversaries recorded as well. So this is a mass that was held in 1897, I think, and it talks about the people. These are the minister's notes, essentially saying, I'm going to acknowledge and call out and call for prayers for the sick, the people who have recently passed, those who are having anniversaries, and this is another really wonderful source that not every archdiocese and diocese across the collection is going to have.
Yeah, when I saw that earlier, I was so surprised. I had no idea that actually even existed. So
right, yeah, yeah, exactly. They're really, really cool records. They're really neat. We also have the British Armed Forces Roman Catholic registers, which includes the Army, Air Force, and Royal Navy from 1836 to 1975. Again, pretty standardized looking records, but they do cover Catholics across the military. So no matter where these people were from, if they had a sacrament event. So in this case, they're baptisms from 1877, and they're at North Camp in Aldershot, New Hampshire, right? So they're not in their home parish, they're in the military, and so they're stationed somewhere else, right? The Westminster Roman Catholic Census from 1893 is a delight. If you do Catholic research and you haven't looked at this yet, just go in and play with the records, because it's fun to read. It actually covered typical census information, plus it recorded the age for those 21 and under, which is something we don't get from most federal or state censuses. And it also asked a couple of different questions, right, about criminal risk and occupation, and is the child's faith in danger? And these questions lead to some really, really amazing answers. So here's a page from that census. This is in Barking, in the mission of Barking. And you see Anne and Charles here. They were brought up Protestant by their grandfather, and that's noticed in the census. So this is a household of mixed faith, right? Both of these households actually are mixed faith marriages. And then you have these two kids that were brought up by their grandfather. Well, why weren't the other kids brought up by grandpa? And now they're 16 and 14. They're back in their parents' household. Like, there's a whole story here just waiting to be unraveled. It's incredible. Oh, yeah. And then another example, this is from 1893. And these comments are just incredible, right? The Lacey children were labeled as very wild, unruly savages. What? Right? And Mr. Crawley, poor Mr. Crawley, right, was not well liked and not quite living up to par, but his Protestant wife was okay, right? And I highlighted the wrong box. I'm sorry. It's the last comment on the page. Bad Catholic with good Protestant wife.
Oh my gosh.
What is happening there, right? It really does make me kind of wonder what my priest said about me when I was growing up in the Catholic faith. But these are just priceless records. So, and then we get, of course, into those non-conformist records that we've been talking about. And this includes Catholic, Apostolic, Roman Catholic. It's 43,000 records that I could find that mention Catholicism, and 190 years of sporadic coverage. So again, you really need to look at all of the different types of records, right? And a couple of just examples, these date back to 1663 and go through the mid 1850s. Of course, the majority are from those later periods of history, but you do get, in some cases, burials and all sorts of other records in this non-conformist set. So, this one's from Cheshire. Those burials begin in the 17th century and expand all the way up through 1910. So there's a lot of research to be done in these non-conformist records.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then we move into Ireland. The Ireland Roman Catholic record collection is incredible. There's 11.2 million records in the collection. It is the same set of images that's on the, I'm sorry, I just completely spaced the name of the archive that published these originally. But it was published for free, so you can access the images on an Irish website, and I'm sure someone in the comments will help me out here. But then
put in there if you know it, guys.
Yeah, thank you. And then both FindMyPast and Ancestry both publish the exact same set of images, but we work together to index them. The indexes are slightly different. So if you are a regular Ancestry user and you can't find your Irish Catholic, try the search on FindMyPast, because we have been making changes and additions to that index. I would note that the parish registers for Ireland for the Roman Catholic Church are free on FindMyPast forever. You do not need a subscription. You need a free account, but you do not need a subscription to access the Ireland Roman Catholic collection. And that includes baptisms, burials, marriages, congregational records, qualification and convert rolls, and the church directory. So it's the whole gamut. It's the whole set. It's great.
Yeah, and I liked your tip about making sure, if you're not finding it on one database, to do the same search on, say, the FindMyPast or vice versa, because they are there are differences, and that can make the difference between finding something and not finding something.
Absolutely. And all the sites are very similar, but they all have their different code underneath the surface, right? So the way our search works is different than the way family search works, right? So it's always good to compare your search results from one site to another. So just a quick example from the Irish collection. This is actually my ancestor, Archibald Mackenzie, and Betty Brown, who were married in County Cork in 1840, January 23rd. And you can see right away from the quality of images. Oh, National Library of Ireland. See, it's stamped on there. That's great. It's a bit difficult to read, right? So if you're scrolling through these pages kind of one by one on National Library of Ireland, you may or may not find what you're looking for just because the microfilm is not the best. So keep that in mind as you're searching through all the different resources. And then, go ahead. Sorry.
So can I ask one question? So someone asked, and I think I actually know the answer to this. A lot of the Irish are these Irish records available for Northern Ireland as well? And I think the answer is yes, because Northern Ireland is a fairly modern entity in the time periods that we're looking at. Did I get that right, Jen?
You absolutely did. Yeah, Northern Ireland didn't exist when most of these records were created. So these are just Ireland, all of Ireland.
Yeah.
And then we do have, of course, through time, very restrictive penal laws that prevented Irish Catholics from owning property or having a business. So many chose to either convert, at least legally, right, by appearances they converted, or swear loyalty to the crown in front of a court so that they could qualify for certain rights. So this Irish collection also includes the names of many people who came to Ireland from other European countries and naturalized as a result of this, and these people who kind of converted in appearance in order to be eligible for property and such. So there's a lot of information here for outside of Ireland, as well as the character of your Irish ancestor, right? So you can kind of deem a lot of information from this collection. And then we get Scotland, and Scotland is really exciting. The Scotland Roman Catholic Parish Registers and Congregational Records collection just continues to grow. And man, I tell you, there are some of the ministers in Scotland. I wish I had ancestors in these parishes, because look at that handwriting. Like, it is so easy to read. And then you compare it to this one, right? But we do go back quite a number of centuries in Scotland. So this is an example of communicants for the first Sunday of Advent of 1768 in this particular parish. And so it's more than just sacraments in Scotland and Ireland and England, right? So go across the board. I'm going to kind of flip through this quickly because I know I'm running out of time.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We have an example of an 1884 confirmation page from Aberdeen Diocese in Scotland. So really some incredibly rich records. We also have English Catholic newspapers. We talked about Philadelphia a bit, but I do want to point out the Tablet, which is a Catholic paper that was published in London. The first issue was 16th of May, 1840, and we have 1843 through 1907 available online on FindMyPast and the British Newspaper Archive. So this is one way in which Catholic newspapers really start to help our research specifically. And then a sample from Philadelphia that we talked about earlier, just showing, this particular snippet is actually showing news from England, right? Printed in a Philadelphia newspaper, Catholic newspaper. And don't forget, of course, just regular newspapers, right? This is one of my favorite entries I've ever found. It's from 1716, the Stamford Mercury. And it says very simply, we hear from Lancashire that several Roman Catholic gentlemen have sold their estates and intend to retire beyond the seas. Well, guess where that is, right? That's the colonies. That's North America. These people are probably headed to Baltimore, Maryland. And that is awesome, right? I just think this entry is so cool.
Oh, yes.
Right. And it gives you a sample of being able to read some of these older newspapers and search them as well. That we've talked about, right? So if you're looking for Catholic records from this area or parish of Ireland, for example, and this is just in a standard newspaper, the Sherborne Mercury from 1800, we learn that in Dublin, on Wednesday, the 18th of December last, a Roman Catholic chapel was burned to the ground in the neighborhood of Newport in the county of Mayo by a party of Orangemen. Well, what did we lose when that church burnt down? We lost their records. We lost their sacraments. We lost their parish registers. More than likely, right? So this is important information to have if you happen to be looking for Catholics in the county of Mayo in the area of Newport, right? Or if you're researching Orangemen in that area, so you know what they were up to. Newspapers are full of goodies like this. This is a motorcycle wedding from Northampton Chronicle and Echo in 1913. The first Catholic marriage at Billing for 15 years, and they did it on motorcycles, and I just love that. So a couple of really key things to keep in mind before I give you the best update on Scottish, the rest of the update on the Scottish records. Know your history, right? And if you're trying to cross the pond in any format, whether it's religious records or something else, there are a series of changing laws, state religions in the British Isles that really made an impact on our Catholic or non-conformist ancestors, and we really have to understand that. You want to keep up on those academic sources as the research just continues. Utilize the records from all the different references and resources that that are available, including the Catholic Record Society. It's a really important one. Utilize those non-conformist, dissenter, Catholic, and Anglican sources, all of them, newspapers, and then, of course, you can search the Find My Past collection in a variety of ways. Whew, that's a lot to say.
You did a fabulous job. You've covered a ton of history.
It's a lot to think about, right? But it's really fun research. I just really enjoy doing this work a lot. What's coming to the Catholic Heritage Archive? Well, more directories from North America. We'll be adding more dioceses in North America and the British Isles, and we will continue to work on that Archdiocese of New York project as best we can, given the circumstances of the world today. But what we're really excited about and what's coming in the next year is really Scotland. The Scottish Catholic Record Collection will be the largest online collection. Most of this has never been digitized before. So if you're particularly looking for Scottish immigration or Scottish heritage, the Highlands and the Islands are of special importance because those were the populations who were more likely to leave for North America. So keep that in mind as you're doing your Scottish Catholic research, that those are areas that Find My Past covers really well. There is the Scottish Free Church included in this collection. We have anti-nuptial relationships and cross-border marriages, death and burial records, including parish registers. So you get the mortcloth records and the burial bell records, which we don't really have time for today, but another interesting facet of religious history, right? And again, I wish I could prove Scottish Catholic collection in my family line, because look at the handwriting on these records. They're so great. So baptisms from 1703 all the way up to 1919, and marriages from 1736 up to 1944 and so forth. So the collection just continues to grow. If you find a civil marriage record in Scotland, now, if you've done any work in Scotland, you probably already know that it typically identifies where someone was married. So if you find that civil record, so for example, in Scotland's People, right, you can find a civil record of marriage, you then know you can immediately go to Find My Past and get the religious version of that same event. So go directly from that civil registration Catholic indication to the Find My Past collection for that religious record. Scotland's People currently has 1.18 million Catholic entries, so it's definitely a resource you want to look at. But the Find My Past collection currently has 2.03 million, and we have a lot more work to do just in this year alone. So as you work through kind of the various types of records in Scottish research and the various sites, check back often on Find My Past to see what we've added, because we're doing a lot of work this year. There is an additional 400,000 images approximately still to be published for the Scottish collection on Find My Past, and we're hoping to get all of that done this year.
That's amazing.
It's incredible. It's so fun.
Amazing. Valerie asked about the Diocese of Brooklyn. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, lots of thoughts on the Diocese of Brooklyn.
Any news on that?
Let me go ahead and pull. You can pull the slides down if you want.
Okay, sure.
I think that's what I wanted to cover. So Brooklyn is actually a different diocese. It's not part of the Archdiocese of New York. So it is not currently part of the project that we're working on with the Archdiocese of New York, because it's its own entity. Last time I checked with them, they were working with the German Genealogy group, which is based in New York and Brooklyn. And they were trying to find a way to digitize and publish their materials in partnership with the nonprofits in the area, the genealogy societies. But of course, COVID has slowed that down dramatically. So unfortunately, Brooklyn is not coming to any of the commercial sites, as far as I know, anytime soon. But again, it's completely up to them.
Yeah, I've actually had, I've requested an archive search through them just directly and had success that way. Though I think, I don't know where they are with the COVID now, but I think it must have slipped under the wire, because right after that, they even pulled their archivist out. So, for a while. So you may just want to contact them directly.
Yeah, that would be my advice. Just email them or call them directly, or find someone locally that can walk into the building when they're able to do so and actually talk to them face to face. I know people have had success that way too. And there's some really great New York-based genealogy research groups on Facebook, for example, that are very, very active in helping each other do those kinds of things. So some opportunities there.
Yeah, so we had a couple questions about, will a copy of the slides or keynote be available? Absolutely, guys. So the video will live on my Facebook page as well as YouTube, but I will also be creating a blog post with that I'll let you guys know, where I'll also have the video there. So you've got several places to find the video. So yes, it will be there. Maureen asked about the Diocese of Boston, and then while you're answering that, I'm going to go back up, because I know there were some questions a little bit earlier I wanted to pull out for you.
Yeah, sure. So Archdiocese of Boston is actually working with the New England Historic Genealogical Society, or NEHGS. You may know them as AmericanAncestors.org. They are currently in the process of digitizing those records and making them available. And it's an exciting project. I haven't had a progress report in a while. I should reach out to them and see how they're doing. The remarkable thing, I think, is that no matter where these records end up, this is really the first time in history that the Catholic Church has kind of said, okay, yeah, we're actually going to make our records available. So it's a really great thing that there are all these different facilities and all these different partners reaching out to the Catholic Church and saying, there's some real value here. And I think some of the natural disasters in North America have influenced those decisions recently, right? You think about Hurricane Katrina and some of the hurricanes along the eastern seaboard in the recent years. There are some dioceses and archdioceses that have lost some really valuable records as a result of those. And they're finally starting to go, these other organizations can help us with this process and make them available, but also preserve them for the ages, right? So, so it's really exciting to see it come across. But yeah, Boston is with American Ancestors. And that is a subscription site or a membership site as well. And they release updates on a pretty consistent, regular basis. So if nothing else, add yourself to their email list so that you get their record releases. And they have a email list specifically for their record updates. So make sure you're on the record. I don't remember exactly what they call it, but make sure you're on their record release email list. Yeah,
that's a real big help. Definitely. Yeah. Somebody wanted to know if there was a place to find the English equivalent to Latin names. I'm not quite sure.
Do they mean like first names?
If you mean, yeah, let's see. She said a lot of times the names are in Latin, but yeah, I think the names were actually just the actual names. They typically weren't. Would there have been?
It depends.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are definitely some instances where they use a Latinized version of a Christian name. Okay. And in that instance, most of them that I've come across are pretty easy to recognize. You can kind of it makes common sense, right? That a Latin version of, I can't even think of any examples off the top of my head, but for the most part, you start to kind of understand the trends and the patterns as you work through the records. But I believe we have a blog post on the FindMyPast blog about names. Google Translate will also help you with that. But there's also a handful of articles and published works available online. And I can't remember any off the top of my head exactly what they're called, but I guess my answer is just use your favorite search engine and Google it. Because you'll come up with something, whether it's an article or a book or a Facebook post or whatever, you'll be able to come up with an answer. We might be able to point you to a more specific resource after I get off this live stream and actually have a chance to dig around for a second.
Yeah, I can look for it too. Yeah. Definitely. And somebody was asking about Southern Diocese. Are any of those going to be among the records?
Southern United States?
I would assume so.
I would assume so. I hope so. My own family's from Alabama. That's where my Catholic story really starts to pick up. So I'm really hoping we'll someday be able to digitize Archdiocese of Birmingham, Alabama. And the short answer is we've made an effort to try and contact as many dioceses and archdioceses across the United States as we possibly can, and most of Canada. We would be interested in talking to all of them and partnering with as many as possible. And I think the same would be true if you talk to Family Search or a representative from, any other commercial genealogy website. Everybody would be eager to help these organizations. Some archdioceses are going to make different rules for themselves. At this time, I don't have anything I can say about a particular Southern diocese, except that we're trying. For the most part, this is a very slow process, right? The trend I reflected on that is so positive that people are starting to digitize. That's really, really important, but it's a very slow road. And it's a very long road to get the rest of the dioceses across most of the English speaking world to kind of participate and play in. Everybody has their own incentives for doing this. So you just kind of have to find the right recipe for the person that you're talking to, and make it work for both parties. And sometimes that's easier said than done. Right? The New York Agreement, for example, took us several years to negotiate and work through before they actually decided that, yes, we can go ahead and do this. So.
Wow. Well, that's great. So I'm trying to make sure there's so many comments, guys. If I missed a question, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to go back through when everything's said and done, and I'll make sure I'll catch back up on those as well. So yeah, definitely. Oh, here's one I did miss real quick. Did the Chicago Diocese, did it include Eastern Europeans?
Yeah, if they were part of the records, yes, we included them in the collection. Absolutely. Yeah. We don't discriminate based on place of origin or location or heritage or anything like that. If it's part of the collection, we publish it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay, well, guys, I think we're going to go ahead and head off. We're at the top of the hour, we're a little past, but thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to, you can view it again. You can share this with your friends who might be interested or for the information on Facebook. And again, I will be publishing show notes on my website, so you'll find it there as well. So thank you so much, Jen, and thank you, FindMyPast, for putting us together and letting us do this kind of fun. We had so much fun.
This has been fun, and I think we've come up with about 1,001 ideas to keep going. So
that's right. All right, guys, have a fantastic day, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.